Hello class, welcome to the next segment in Lab 3, and in this segment we're going to explore the idea of a nested for loop, which is just a fancy way of saying having a for loop within a for loop or a loop within a loop. So I'll just go ahead and put an example of that up on the screen here. So here I have a loop for x in range 0, 6 indentation. So again, that indentation means this is part of this loop up here. And then I have for y in range 0, 3 colon, and again, indentation, which is to say that this print statement is part of this loop, and this loop is part of this loop. Now, this might seem mildly confusing at first, or maybe more than mildly confusing at first, but the whole idea behind this is every time this outer loop runs, every time this loop that has x in it, every time that loop runs, then this loop will reset itself and run through. So just to sort of start things off here, we begin this loop with x being equal to 0. And then we go down to this loop and we begin that with setting y equal to 0. Again, that first number in the range here is the starting value for our looping variables, in this case x and y. So that's how the loop first begins, with x equals 0, y equals 0. And then we'll print out what the values of x and y are. And just like with the idea of using a for loop in conjunction with a list, let's actually go ahead and make a table to sort of illustrate what exactly is going on here. So there's our lovely table. And again, the first value of x, 0, our first value of y is 0, so that means this print statement should print out 0, 0 to start things off. All right, so now after we've run through this inner loop here, we go to the next cycle of that loop. And by going to the next cycle of that loop, that will take us from y equals 0 to y equals 1. So we would get that as a result. Because x is still 0. We're still in this, we still haven't reached the end of this loop, this outer loop. We have to finish this inner loop first before we can go to the next cycle in the outer loop. And again, the inner loop uses y, the outer loop is the one that has x in it. So we have to finish the inner loop first, so that means, and we're not done with that yet. So the next value that we have so the next value of y from that would be y equals 2. Again, x is still 0. So we get this result. We get 0 for x, 2 for y, and we'll print out 0, 2. Now remember, we go up to but not including this number. So now that y is 2, which is up to but not including this number, this inner loop is now finished. So that means this outer loop can go to its next cycle, so x will go from 0 to 1, and then we begin this inner loop again. So we start with x equals 0. We started off with x equals 0. Now that we've completed this inner loop once, x can now go to 1, and then we'll run this inner loop once again. So x equals 1, this inner loop resets itself. So when x is equal to 1, so when we go through this cycle, when x is equal to 1, y is set equal to 0 initially. So that would give us a result that looks like this. And then y goes to its next value. So while x is still 1, y is still 0, we run this print statement, so now this inner loop that involves the variable y can now go to its next value, so now y is equal to 1, x is still 1, so we get this result. And then we go up to but not including this number again. So that means stepping y up equal to 2, and while x is still 1, we get this result. And if we continue that exercise over and over again, we'll get an output that looks something like this. So 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, and then so on and so on until x reaches its maximum value, in which case the outer loop terminates, and once the outer loop terminates, then the program can proceed onward normally, like it normally would. So this whole idea of putting a loop within a loop, you can sort of think of it as a loop that's being repeated. So hopefully you've got sort of an intuitive understanding of how a loop works. The idea of repeating a loop means you're going to be, you're just going to be repeating a loop over and over again. There's not much else you can say about that. But having this nested for loop set up, and it's no accident that I use the variables x and y here, because I want to illustrate what you can use a nested for loop for, and that is to scan through something that's multidimensional. And in the case of a one-dimensional list, we use just one loop to scan through each individual item within a list. If we want to scan through something two-dimensional, then we have to use two loops. Technically, you could get away with using one loop, but it would get really complicated, so I wouldn't even worry about trying it that way. And if you want to scan through something three-dimensional, then you would need three loops, and four-dimensional, four loops, so on and so forth. But since since you're going to be working with a two-dimensional data set, then you only have to worry about how two nested for loops work for this specific project. But you may have to worry about using three nested for loops in some later part of some later programming project that you might be running into. But I want to sort of illustrate how exactly that would work. So here I'll create sort of a grid where I have the values of y along the vertical axis and the values of x along the horizontal axis. And again, just to refresh your memory, this is how the loop begins with x equals 0, y equals 0. So we could theoretically pull out this particular element out of a list. So again, remember, or an array. So remember the two numbers that have to go inside of a list or an array if you want to access a specific entry. The first number is the row number, and the second number is the column number. So if we did my array bracket y comma x for this first cycle through both loops, we would get this particular entry in the array, whatever that might be. And we go to the next cycle, which is this one, the second row in the table on the right hand side here. You can see it would give us this item in our two-dimensional array. And if we go to the next combination of x and y, it would give us this item in the array. And we go to the next item, that would give us this one. The next combination of x and y, we get this item. And then we can repeat that process until we scan through the entirety of our two-dimensional array, and then whatever task we need to accomplish by doing that can then be complete once the two loops are done. So hopefully this helps illustrate how you can use the idea of a nested for loop to scan through something two-dimensional, whether that's an array or a list or whatever it might be. But let's actually take a look at a Python program that uses this. So again, you see this is pretty much the same thing that we had before. And just to verify that the program actually does this, does what it said, so I can go ahead and run this. You can see we do in fact get that result that we were looking for. That is, we confirm the result that we got from this little exercise that we did here. And if I was working with, say, I'll pretend that I have some sort of two-dimensional array. So if I wanted to scan through each individual row and each individual column, this would be the setup that would look like. Actually, I shouldn't use x, I should use something else. So I'll just say the entry is equal to, so if you were actually setting this up in a two-dimensional array, this would be what you would use. And if you wanted to set that array equal to something else, then you just simply reverse the order here. Something like this. So again, we're pretending that we have a two-dimensional array that could be included as part of this program, but that's how that setup would actually go. So this would be if you want to scan through each individual item in the array and set them equal to something else, or the other case where I want to scan through each individual item in the array and get whatever that value is, and then remember what that is, and then do whatever with it, whatever that might be. So that's going to do it for this segment. Hopefully the idea of nested for loops makes at least some sense. And the main thing that you want to focus on is how you can actually combine this with the idea of a multi-dimensional array so you can one by one access each individual entry in the array. So with that, that's going to do it for this segment. So I will see you all in the next segment.